Hello and welcome back. And no, this isn't an attachment for a Hoover, it's not a small flute, and it's not a shoehorn. This is the GL.iNet Comet Pro. This is their new KVM device going to Kickstarter, well, probably right now. I'm recording this part of the video at the very least before their crowdfunding has even started, but I would argue this has left me remarkably impressed. Is it perfect? No. It definitely has a little work to do, unsurprisingly, for a crowdfunding product, but as a remote access keyboard video mouse device for easy setup for remote accessing your devices, this is incredible. And I am indeed factoring in that JetKVM that was released last year to universal acclaim. I think this is the closest I've seen to a device, at least right now, that can challenge that. But before we go any further, remember, crowdfunding, this is a device not going to traditional retail. GL.iNet has a pretty good history so far with crowdfunding, launching several products. So I'm under no illusions. I think they are going to launch this, but still nonetheless, remember, this is not traditional retail. This is crowdfunding. It comes with risks. Keep that in mind. Now, why do I need a KVM device? Surely, if I've got a PC like this one and I can just use something like TeamViewer or even Tailscale to remote access my PC, surely that's just as good, right? Well, it's not perfect, notwithstanding if you do want to use those services, you're generally quite limited in what you can do. And more importantly, if you are accessing a device like this from cold boot, from BIOS level, whether it is that you want to install new operating systems or you're setting a device up for the first time and you don't want to connect a keyboard and video mouse and you want something more convenient, that is where something like this comes in. It connects to your client device via USB. It then also connects to the local area network, either via gigabit networking there, not 2.5G, we'll get onto that later on, or via Wi-Fi 6 via dual band wireless connectivity. And it means that instead of using those services that I mentioned that have to be locked within inside an operating system, again, your Tailscales, your TeamViewers, this allows you to access this device from a cold boot BIOS level via KVM anywhere in the world or just simply on the local area network. Now, it will come as no surprise, as this device is going via crowdfunding, that pricing is a little more complicated. So what do I mean by that? Well, early pricing is going to be at $99 from what I understand, if it's already live. Hopefully some of those are available. There are another tier after that, $109, and a tier after that, $129. And as each one sells out, then it will go on to the other pricing. Now, intended delivery is slated, at least at the moment, for December this year, 2025, at least for the first wave. And alongside this, there is another device called the Fingerbot that I'll be featuring in a follow-up video, more on that later on, and an ATX power device, both of which use a USB 2 connection there on the rear. Again, we'll get back to those later on. But this device also has internal storage. It's 32 gigabytes, which isn't great. I'll bang on about this more later on, but I'm kind of gutted there isn't the option here for an SD card slot or a convenient way to extend the storage. All of the kind of pass-through for this device on your local device is done via USB. I'm still finding out from the brand, and if I do know by now, I'll put on the bottom of the screen, but I still don't know the protocol of that USB, whether it's 5 gig or 10 gig. My gut tells me 5 gig USB, but we'll have to wait and see. But that does mean you're locked in on that storage at 32 gig. You can't expand it. And although it is a scale up from the previous generation device, and indeed more than a lot of KVMs in the market, it's still not a huge amount to play with. They have improved the performance. It is still eMMC inside there. Now, I got consistent 23 to 25 megabytes per second write performance, which again, well, it's all right, but it's not exactly groundbreaking there, is it? But it is still a scale up there. Now, that storage can be used in two ways. The more important, probably the more demanded way, is that you can load this device up with multiple ISOs. So again, your Linux, your Windows, your whatever, different ISOs on board, and then you can pick and choose the ISO that you want this device to present to the connected system as if it was connected via USB or via a DVD, or I could say image drive inside, and that's where it gets picked up there on the BIOS level. Alternatively, you can use any storage items that you place inside that 32 gig to just be available as a USB from within the connected client OS there. So if you dump a load of files on that 32 gig there, you can just set it up that it's a read-write USB conveniently accessible within that operating system now, though I think most users, they're going to go for the image level stuff, right? Talking of that LCD, the LCD panel there presents you several things. So number one, when you set the device up for the first time, you can connect it to either a wireless connection or a LAN connection. If you go with the wireless connection, the great thing is it will scan the local area network for different Wi-Fi hotspots that this is located within, and then you can use a touchscreen keyboard panel there to enter that password. Alongside that, you can also use the same touchscreen to add a PIN number to this device, so that means even if you've got this device connected permanently to this and you're worried that someone on the other side of the world is going to try and remotely go in, you can disable access locally on the bare metal by making sure the PIN has to be entered to enable that. You can lock it completely locally if you choose when you need. That locking, by the way, also extends to having to create a password to access this device remotely, be it on the local area network or remotely over the internet, and enabling two-factor authentication if you choose to. And although they do have remote access KVM service for you to bounce off of, so you can use their service, not most users probably aren't going to use that, and it still is untested just how well it's going to run with multiple connections bouncing off of that relay. Alongside that, though, they have included native Tailscale support there. So you don't have to install an app, it's just there. You can add your own Tailscale credentials to allow remote access to this and therefore the connected client device there. The general user interface on the desktop screen of the LCD is just simply the time, and once you enter the PIN to log into the device, you can see activations there for the individual HDMI in, HDMI out, because you can output to a local monitor, so this thing can just be passive in the background and therefore accessible when you need it. But that's really it. You can change the brightness, you can sever the remote relay service if you choose to, and establish it if you choose, but it would require a client device in order to get that done better. Overall, the LCD control definitely helps, certainly, and it is going to definitely mean that this device is going to be used in a lot more of my reviews of mini PCs and NAS devices, because it's going to allow me to set up KVM a great deal easier without setting up a big keyboard and monitor every single time and then having pass-through so I can screen record for the reviews. I can definitely see utility for this in that. Now, the HDMI output maxes out at 4K at 30 frames per second, but that does mean it can still output at 1080p at 60 frames. Now, the output, when you are utilizing either the access via the web browser or you're accessing the device via the client applications for Mac and Windows systems, no Linux from what I can see at the moment, it does mean that when you're outputting here, you can use the CPU inside a quad-core ARM to transcode to a point, or just basically change the output there to be better suited to, lower bit rate or ultimately lower bandwidth connections, I should say. But you've got that level of control built in, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail in the software section. The base level hardware is mostly okay. It's a quad-core ARM CPU. That's an A53 ARM processor there. Only 1 gig of RAM. Little disappointing, not unlike something I touched on. I was talking about some of the more recent travel routers of theirs, like this, the Slate 7. Kind of would have liked to have seen a bit more RAM, but I will say a lot of these kind of easily deployable KVM systems, 1 gig's pretty good compared to some of those, but I still would have liked to see them just a fraction more. It only weighs 170 grams. There's no way to make that heavier with like a storage drive or anything like that. As mentioned, I don't know the protocol of the USB input there connected between this and the client, but the second USB there is our power USB. Now, a lot of the documentation that we've seen didn't really go into a lot of detail about whether you can power this off of your client machine. And you can. It's a 5-volt USB, and we'll talk about power consumption in a moment. Now, you can either use the included PSU that this has. This is just a 10-watt interchangeable plug point PSU. Realistically, your phone charge is not going to be dissimilar to this. Or you can, of course, connect this to your client system, and it's a 5-volt USB. I got this running off of just domestic USB 3.2 Gen 1 very easily. Now, it's nice to have that choice, but just keep in mind, if you are thinking, well, I can just connect this to my client device, and I'm laughing, keep in mind that when your client machine powers down, it's then going to sever power to this in most cases, unless you go into the BIOS and change your USB power input during power down on your client machine. Ultimately, I would always recommend running one of these off of a mains outlet overall, but it's nice to have the flexibility there. Also, in terms of power consumption, when I had the device in idle over the course of about 24 hours, power went as low as 1.5 to 2.5 watts overall when the system was doing absolutely nothing in the background, and it was connected to my client machine, which in that case was a 4-bay M.2 NVMe NAS system, and that was with HDMI in and HDMI out. Now, alongside that, when I had the device being written to on that eMMC memory and two distinct connections to the connected device via this, that power consumption went up to about 4.3 to 4.5 watts there. So again, I would probably recommend still going to using the external PSU, but again, the flexibility is nice. Also, during the course of my testing, I had this up and running for about 24 hours initially and connected it from remote access and local access protocol. They're just over time, but I ultimately wanted to see the temperatures. So after 24 hours of the system periodically being accessed, I saw the front panel there get to about 40 degrees. I saw the top panel get to about 41, 42 degrees. The base was where it got hottest, and there is ventilated panels there on the base at 47 to 49 degrees, and the back where the connections were, and I had every single port filled with a connected device, that got to 42 to 43 degrees. So not too shabby. I didn't see any throttle when I was accessing the device. I was overall pretty happy with it. Another thing I liked is that both of those HDMI outputs are full fat HDMI. There's no USB-C to HDMI, there's no mini HDMI, there's no display port. It is proper HDMI there, which I'm pleased to see. And again, that software is using a KVM fork. Again, the previous one, the non-Pro Comet device, took advantage of that. But still, it's nice to not have to use any kind of adapter or kind of modifiable cable. And again, they include pretty much everything with the kit. There was the two HDMI cable to the HDMI in and out, a USB A to C, a C to C, and a network cable. Everything I needed was included. I will say though, as happy as I am that these are HDMI full fat, I will say this not being PoE is something of a bummer. I don't mind that it's not 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, because realistically, all the output from the client machine is going to be via that USB that we're still in the process of finding out what that protocol is. There was never really going to be a 2.5 GBE being usable in the way this is going to be deployed, I think, for most users realistically. However, having to rely on USB input when we could have combined both power and network connectivity via single port, because there are PoE KVMs, by the way. Indeed, the non-Pro version of this is seeing an update to a PoE version. So it kills me that that's not something that's been factored in here. It's great that it's USB Type-C power, and it's great that I can power it from my client if I really want to, but at the same time, PoE would have been nice. But talking about the physicalities of this device and ports and connections isn't enough. Let's look a little bit more into that software, the beta software that this arrived with right now, just to see where they're at and where they're hoping to go. Right, so we've got quite a lot here to unpack on screen just to go through. On the right hand side of the screen, we have got the client application on a Windows machine here with remote access established there using the beta software 1.6. Now, alongside that, on the left hand side of the screen, we've got the device being accessed on a local area network there, and I've indeed connected this with the GL.iNet account here, so you can see how I can still access it here via the web browser if I choose to. So I could go with remote control, and it'll open up in a brand new tab for us there, establishes a connection, and I've already logged into the device. Let's see if it allows me to do that again. And as you can see, we're now logged into that device. So that's remotely over the internet, and I've got it there on the local client as well. So let's close those down because we'll come back to that a little later. And for now, let's crack on with the client. So these are the controls you have in the settings menu there. You can go ahead and change that resolution on the fly. And again, that is only controlling your input via the KVM, not the actual resolution itself, which again, you've got native controls, right click, etc. And you can even switch down there to a compression supported codec there, I should say compression technique. On top of that, rotation, then you've got the resolution change there within the client to change that streaming. Obviously, it's going to be reflected and affected by the OS that you're accessing remotely there, but it's still nice to have that, and you can customize it pretty significantly there. On top of that, we've got the remote access there, whether we want to use the speakers or the microphone control. And again, one of those, I'm kind of disappointed it does need a restart there for the microphone control. If you're going for remote access there, providing support to someone who you've set this device up with, I can understand that might be a bit annoying. Same goes down here on the bottom right. You're able to manage some of those controls there quite easily. You've got mouse control, local cursor, of course. Then you've got the mouse jiggle there if you don't want to have a screensaver kicking in. And then you've got the scroll rate. You can even change that scroll scrolling there, and I know we've all got different feelings on scroll. Mouse mode there, either total or just relative to what you are accessing there. Next up, you've got the system identity there, and again, you can change some of that. Presumably these are customizable profiles that will change over time, and again you can see them put in there, but how much customization there is really going to come down to how much GL.iNet support this here. Language, color modes, again we can go to light switch to dark if we choose to. Again, I'm sure someone in the comments is already annoyed that I didn't select it to dark earlier. And there at the bottom, we've got the Ethernet control there. We can change the little KVM devices identity there, static, dynamic, etc., as well as modify the Wi-Fi that it's connecting to. So this is the Wi-Fi that the local client device is in, that KVM. So again, if you want to switch that network, you can go and scan the local area network that the device is found within and connect it to one of the ones there, which is pretty nifty indeed. Remember that that's not the device I am using right now. That is where the KVM device is located there. So fairly reasonable settings there. It was quite nippy as well. Then we got the toolbox. The toolbox there's something you're probably going to enjoy there. Again, you've got your copy and paste relative to that on-side the client you're accessing there. But what I thought was really interesting is the customizable shortcuts. So you've got a bunch of standard stuff, you know, Control, Alt, Delete. But it's the idea that I could create a customizable one that I really enjoyed there, particularly when I wanted to get into BIOS, when I didn't know what the BIOS key would be. So this will allow me a single click to click every traditional BIOS button, including, you know, delete, escape, F12, F7, F2, etc. Same goes with adding Wake-on-LAN to local devices. So if I've got a NAS with Wake-on-LAN, I can actually connect it here via the local area network that the KVM is going into, which is pretty neat. And then you've got the terminal access there, of course. If you are using a device that's going to require SSH input there, that's quite nice to have. I'm not going to exploit too much. That might be for the second video in this campaign. Next up, we've got the accessory devices there. Now, I've not connected the little Fingerbot and not connected the ATX, but this is where you would find it there. That's something I'm going to add into the follow-up video because I didn't really get time to add it here early on in the campaign. And I know I could have added it, but as I've mentioned in the video, I think it's going to be better to spread this out because there's a lot to cover. Virtual media, I've uploaded those 3 VMs. So what I really like, not 3 VMs, 3 ISOs. So you drag and drop them in there. I did that earlier on. But what I really like is this remote to mount. So whether it is you want to create comparable to just a standard USB drive that this data is going to be on, so you're creating a virtual USB that lives within the KVM device, or more often than not, uploading ISOs into this device, and those ISOs are therefore going to be connected to the system at boot and of course at all times. This means you can select which one of those you want to go for. Maybe it's going to be a driver CD that you want to upload from your local connecting device onto the KVM device, and then from there upload the drivers for utility within the client operating system you're accessing. That's pretty neat there. Same goes again with that remote mount file sharing that'll allow you to turn any of these into a standard drive. So again, if we go in, we'll be able now to see that this drive will have connected that into our range of available drives there. So you can't use the other USB drive, the USB port there for adding more storage. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm not overly fond of the fact there isn't an SD card slot on this because I do think the amount of storage it includes isn't massive. And on top of that, it's actually quite slow, that eMMC storage. So I wish there was a way to add better and further storage for those ISOs. Again, in the App Center, you've got the Tailscale stuff there to allow for safer and more secure access there. And that's really it for the customization options, at least within the client device there. And again, collapsible toolbar, you can minimize options quite easily. It's quite responsive. Checking for updates, all fairly easy stuff. That remote access is established there. You've got security with that 2-factor authentication that you can enable on the fly. And that's really it, rebooting. And pretty much everything you would expect to see in this client, but it does feel nippy, it does feel responsive. Now, if we flick over to the web browser, you're able to see via the local access, it's largely the same. Again, we can change a lot of the options that we've already talked about there. It's still accessing exactly the same VM. So if I go ahead and open up things willy-nilly and just start clicking around the screen, as you can see, the remote access and the local access, it's all running simultaneously. Remove that option there. It's all pretty much the same option. So you're not honor bound to use the remote access, and you're not You don't have to use the client app, and you definitely don't have to use their remote access. You can make this strictly local, although there wasn't an option that I could find to allow me to apply my own SSL certificate there. Didn't give me an option to kind of bolt that in for myself. At the bottom left of the screen, we've got that monitored real-time information about the access via peer-to-peer. And on the bottom right, again, real-time abilities to control the input-output of those accessories. But I would have liked to have seen the means to add the likes of my own remote access certificate, because yes, because I'm accessing this device on the local area network, this isn't do or die, that is HTTPS, but still, if I wanted to bind this to another service, I can do that. So for example, if I don't want to use their own cloud service and I want to unbind it, I can use other binding devices, but I haven't had much of a chance to kind of explore that yet. Needless to say, they have made it remarkably easy if you want to use their own services to bind it to your own cloud account there that you set up with them, or using that bind with code there. But again, it's whether you want to use their service. Obviously, they're going to make it easy to connect to their own, but still nonetheless, I just thought I would cover it. Uploading files is pretty consistent when it comes to the performance. I saw the numbers pretty much largely always living at around 23 to 25 megs there. And if I upload that, like you saw, I uploaded a video file there and I go to remote mount, that will allow me to remote mount file sharing here, which then means that I've connected, the connected KVM will now be visible as large amounts of storage. So down there, as you can see, the KVM, we've got all of those ISOs there, but we've also got that video that I just uploaded. But of course, that is a pretty substantially painful codec there for this Linux OS to be running there, but it's still the file, so still nonetheless it is pretty nippy, but still an SD card slot would have been great, or better, faster storage with a USB drive to make the most of it. Remains to be seen. Needless to say, when I'm accessing the device on the local area network, it's as smooth as silk. We are talking about even me connecting this device via the rather lowly 1 gigabits per second is not going to be a huge amount, but there's still 100 megabytes or so connectivity and bandwidth to play with, if it's more than enough for a local KVM. Now, at the moment, we can't really gauge the GL.KVM service to its extent. Well, notwithstanding, this is still a beta and a device that is in crowdfunding. I don't think it's going to be representative of larger amounts of users accessing it all at the same time. When I did access it using their remote services, it felt very responsive. But again, with so few people using it right now, that's not enough to go on at this time. Early testing of this software is pretty nice right now. It is still a device in crowdfunding and it hasn't reached full release, but what I'm seeing so far does seemingly address some of the issues that a lot of users had with the previous release Comet device and where the software was at. But again, all of I've shown you today is representative of version 1.6. Version 1.6.0 beta 2, and might not be representative of what you receive in the end. Something else I want to touch on with that software real quick. A couple of things. Number one, I think they could be a lot clearer about the fact that that software is kind of using an open source platform. They've been a lot clearer, I would say, more recently, but in the past they perhaps were a little bit more obtrusive about where the software was being built on top of. Another thing I will say, and again, this is more of an aspirational wish, I think, if they're going to do relay services. When I got to that point where I could put ISOs on this device, I know that there are some brands, look at QNAP with their virtualization station, for example. They have a kind of ISO database where you can download an ISO. I think that's something that these guys could stand to do. When you look at their routers, they have an app center that allows you to download apps that are ready to deploy on their travel routers. So it would be quite nice if they had some sort of app repository that I could access to download ISOs directly in this and eliminate me having to drag and drop them on there. But again, I know that is more wish fulfillment. That's something more for the crowdfunding to maybe keep an eye on the ball there. Now, testing the latency and the fidelity of this device is obviously going to be relative to my own personal setup. I had it set up on the local IP. I was using their own remote access relay. If I was using Tailscale, it might have been slightly different. I was also using the browser and client for different kinds of access. So I tried it in a few different ways. But I will say, as you can see, when I had an Ubuntu VM, an Ubuntu client installed on the NAS, and it was being accessed via the KVM device, as you can see there on screen, I had the stopwatch running. And if there is a difference there, it is hard to see on the naked eye there. It's got to be, we are talking hundredths of a second difference there. Still, nonetheless, this is one, factoring in, this is my own personal setup, and two, this is when the remote access relay servers that they provide aren't at their busiest. So we're still testing something in beta right now. The brand does say that when you are using their remote access relays, that no passwords are stored on GL.iNet servers there, and you can set the device up with no account registration. So you can use the device out the box without using their own servers for remote access. As mentioned, this is video 1 of 2, because I'm going to wait until later in the campaign to see what updates come along in terms of the software for this device, but also how they answer queries from backers in the comments there, something I recommend you guys do. So this isn't the full story yet. But overall, this is nice, and this is going to be entering my local setup here. Again, at that $99, at least for the earliest backers, I think this delivers, at least of what I am holding right now, and the software I have seen delivers on $99. Most users are going to want to know how this compares to the JetKVM. Now, because that had its own little screen as well, it's quite comparable, although it is indeed a little bit smaller than this. Side by side, it has to be said that the Comet Pro here does benefit from being released later on from the JetKVM, and there's just simple improvements in terms of hardware there that have clearly been made possible over time. So, for example, the Comet has more base level storage. It has a higher core CPU there. Rather than a ROC chip, it's rocking out that ARM 4-core A5 III. It has that full fat HDMI instead of mini HDMI there. Also, it's not reliant on just being utilized by a LAN physical Ethernet port there. You've got that Wi-Fi connection, and then you've got the connected devices like that Fingerbot there. Yes, it looks like this Comet Pro is going to be rocking out a higher price tag than the JetKVM, but that JetKVM, when it came out, the base level hardware is a little lower there, and that is one that has completed that crowdfunding there for the most part. And I think the retail pricing is going to be a little bit more comparable, at least to the intended crowd pricing for this. But when both hit traditional retail, almost certainly the Comet Pro will be more expensive. Ultimately, I'm really happy with this, but it's still a crowdfunding product that is not finished yet. The software has the word beta clearly labeled. You can see that it's almost complete new version there. No doubt further testing and feedback from reviewers and from members of the public on via the crowdfunding is going to make its mark. But overall, I really like what I'm seeing here, and if GLI can just stay the course and keep this thing stable and smooth and not hit some of the early presentation bumps of rolling out like they did with the previous Comet when it was released a little bit too unfinished for some, I think this could do very, very well. It has earned its place in my local testing here, and no doubt when you see me testing NAS in the future, do not be surprised if this is the device I'm using in order to get into that KVM. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you want to see in video 2. As I say, I'm going to be testing different remote access, not even just simple PC stuff. I'm going to get a bit experimental just to see the fidelity of this device and how well it holds up. What did I like? I like the build quality. I like the LCD, very responsive. I like the multi-layers of local and remote level security and severing if I choose to. I like the choice of ports and connections from the full fat HDMI to USB Type-C and all the cables I need. I would have liked PoE for the power, and I definitely would have liked to have seen an SD card slot somewhere on this device. I like the temperatures over that 24-hour period. The power consumption is relative, to the setup and how I was using it. Again, we are talking about an LCD-equipped device. It's perhaps a pinch higher than some would like, but still nonetheless, for something that's always going to be there for me to fall back on, the standby wasn't too bad. Overall, really happy with what I'm seeing. Is it finished? No, but I think I like where this is going. But as I say, tell me what you guys think of what you want to see in that second video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to play with this a little bit more, and I will see you on the next video.